Hi everyone, welcome to our Zoom talk on shareholder activism. Really looking forward to that. I'm just going to wait a few minutes or maybe a minute until the last of the people join online. Then I'm going to hand over to Mandy for the intro. Some people are posting their what Aboriginal land they're joining from tonight. So if people would like to do that, would be a nice acknowledgement. Oh, Sue's got it in her name already. Paramount Country.
Well done, Sue.
So I reckon just take it away when you're ready, Mandy.
Okay, let's get started then. Hello, I'm Mandy Graham. I'm a member of the events team of the Sustainable Prosperity Action Group. We are a small, energetic group of grassroots activists working out of Adelaide, and we campaign for urgent climate action and improving economic and social justice for all Australians. And in particular, at the moment, we're promoting the concept of a federal jobs guarantee, which, if enacted, would mean that every Australian who wants a minimum wage job with all the benefits could have one. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I'd like to welcome you to this evening's Monday night Zoom talk featuring campaigner at Market Forces, Rachel Deans. Rachel has generously volunteered her time to speak with us about how shareholders, including superannuation fund members, can use their shares in companies to influence the actions that those companies take. Before I introduce Rachel, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Kaurna land on which we meet this evening and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge that the sovereignty of the land was never ceded and that this land was and always will be Aboriginal land. For anyone who's joining us from outside the Adelaide area, please feel free, as Gabby said, to acknowledge your traditional land, send us a greeting, and you can use the chat for this. I'd like to introduce Gabby too. She's our wonderful organiser at Sustainable Prosperity. She's an absolute treasure, and she's also the tech wizard this evening. So if you've got any problems, just pop a message in the chat for her. If you've got any questions to Rachel too, just put those directly in the chat, and Rachel's kindly indicated that she's really happy to answer questions along the way. So start asking now. It's my great pleasure now to introduce Rachel. She's a former Melbourne University Environment Officer. She started an internship with Market Forces in 2016, and this quickly led to a campaigning position with a focus on working with and empowering shareholders, particularly those who have shares in banks, insurance companies and mining companies. As part of her talk, Rachel's going to explain how she came to be a campaigner with Market Forces, and she's going to talk a bit about that organisation too. So I won't spoil all of that. I'm going to quickly hand you over to Rachel. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for having me. I also want to acknowledge that I'm here on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and really highlight the intrinsic link between First Nations justice and environmental justice. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about Market Forces, the work that we do, and then go through like banks, super funds, shareholder action, and insurance companies, and talk about, how some of these companies are funding fossil fuel projects, so coal, oil and gas, which is contributing to climate change, but how you can try and make a difference and pull these companies in the other direction. And I'll also show some examples of when that's been really, when that's worked and where some campaigns have worked. As Mandy mentioned before, please feel free to type any questions in the chat. It's a little bit hard for me to see those when I'm sharing my screen. So maybe Mandy and Gabrielle, if you could just take the questions as they come, and then I would prefer this to be an interesting presentation with questions and dialogue throughout, but also feel free to kind of unmute yourself and ask questions. Okay, so I'll just share my screen here. Can everyone see this presentation okay? Great. Okay, wonderful. All All right, so I'm just going to play, actually, in my other screen, I'm just going to play a little video now on like what is Market Forces. We're an environmental organization. I know I work with some of you already, which is great. But yeah, we work with people to hold institutions accountable for what they spend money on. But I feel like this little video gives a really good overview of what Market Forces is and what we can achieve together.
It was a manic Monday in the financial markets.
In negative territory, Woodside Patrol.
Concerned about Australia's level of debt.
The doomsday scenarios abound.
We're told about market forces as if it's some kind of invisible, supernatural power, impacting our daily lives but beyond our capacity to influence.
But behind all of the graphs and tables, commodity prices, exchange rates and market fluctuations are people. Markets are built on communities. They only exist because of all of us, the work that we do, the services we provide, and the choices we make. Market forces are the sum total of all of our decisions about what we buy, sell, support, avoid, where we put our money and to whom we deny our money. The problem is that all too often we don't make choices. Instead, we allow the banks and superannuation funds that are supposed to be looking after our money to choose where to invest it. We allow governments to spend our tax dollars in a way that suits their political backers more than the public interest. The economy is full of big companies who will donate, advertise and lobby their way towards maximising their profits, often at the expense of planet and people. We're here to counter those voices with those of people who want their money used in a way that supports the environment and community, not damaging it. Market Forces is the bank customer who publicly closes their account and moves to a bank that won't fund dirty fossil fuel projects. It's active community members engaging with company staff to change the company's behaviour. It's shareholders who make sure that the companies they own are well managed and well governed and have business strategies that are aligned with keeping global warming under control. It's citizens who vote for and challenge governments to use our tax dollars to support activities that benefit the community and penalise activities that harm it. That is us. That is Market Forces. By acting together, our campaigns have shifted billions of dollars, helping thousands of people align their own money with their personal values and sending powerful signals to companies about how they need to change in the process. Dozens of financial institutions have responded to people raising their voices by introducing policies that reduce or eliminate investments in dirty fossil fuels. We've shown what's possible. Now we need to step that up. We're battling some of the most urgent environmental issues humanity has ever faced. Now more than ever, we need people to stand up and tell companies, financial institutions and governments that it is not okay to spend our money on environmental destruction. We can make sure that the governments and financial institutions that are lucky enough to have custody of our money use it in a way that supports environmental and societal protection. All we need is you.
What a great video.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
it's a good one, isn't it? I mean, I feel like it shows how much, collective power we have. And hopefully this presentation will give you a bit of a flavour of that as well. So I guess I'll go over how to use, how to use your power as an investor, a little bit of information about like banks, and then we can have questions and answers. Again, please ask questions and answers throughout, but then we'll go over insurance, shareholder work, and the superannuation fund work as well. Great. So I guess, this whole presentation and, the shareholder work and the bank work and everything, as individuals who have savings in banks, investments in shares, superannuation funds, you have the power to choose whether your money funds environmental destruction or energy transformation and climate solutions. And I want to acknowledge that sometimes this isn't simple. Like I know some people can only get a mortgage loan from one bank, for example, and just say that bank is invested in fossil fuels. But what I hope you get out of this presentation is that if you are a customer invested in a bank that is, contributing money to fossil fuels, that you can actually push your bank to stop funding fossil fuels and create collective action, which shifts money away from fossil fuels. So, I mean, it sounds like you're a pretty savvy environment group and you're all over that, but just to, this is mainly for folks that, maybe don't get the link between fossil fuels and climate change. But, when coal, oil and gas is burnt, it produces CO2 and it's one of the largest drivers of climate change. So I guess, what does a fossil fuel company need to keep burning and keep exploring for fossil fuels? A fossil fuel company needs debt, insurance, and investors. So what we're trying to do is cut off the supply of debt, insurance, and investors. So you'll see this slide shows that ANZ, Commonwealth Bank, NAB, and Westpac between 2016 to the end of 2019 contributed significantly more money to dirty fossil fuel projects than renewable energy. Commonwealth Bank contributed the most, followed by ANZ, NAB, and Westpac. And unfortunately, these companies are continuing to fund fossil fuel projects. And I guess as customers of these big four banks, we can really push these big four banks to kind of stop funding fossil fuels. So there's a website there that you can go to. You can have a look at what your bank is investing in fossil fuels. And there's also email templates that you can use to contact your bank and say, hey, I don't want you investing in fossil fuels. So what we're asking from banks is not to lend to new fossil fuel projects and not to lend to companies that are building or planning new fossil fuel projects. And phasing out exposure to thermal coal, which is coal made to create energy by 2023, and set oil and gas exposure phase out dates in line with keeping global warming banks seen which are adequate and which are not adequate. But as you can see, there's a lot of the banks aren't doing enough at all. And so I think we have a collective responsibility to kind of push the banks to do better. Some of the ways that we've done this in the past. So Westpac last year was due to update their policy, their climate policy. And, thanks to Westpac customers taking action, thanks to people donating to this mural that was on the side of the building, and thanks to campaigning to people, it actually really pressured Westpac and they came out with a fairly decent climate policy. It's not perfect, but it just shows that, customers and people like making a bit of a fuss can actually make a really big difference. At the moment, NAB was due to update their oil and gas policy and they've just released it. It's not as adequate as people would have liked. And NAB currently, last year they provided a loan to an oil and gas pipeline that is decimating sacred lands of the Wet'suwet'en people in Canada. And so we're working with, NAB shareholders and NAB customers to hold NAB to account for funding that project and other projects like that. So there are lots of various, there are various parts of our website which enable you to, put your bank on notice, find a new bank, make the switch and tell your story. So it can be really powerful, one, to engage with your bank and say, I don't want you funding fossil fuels, posting on their social media, doing various things. But after a while, you might say, okay, I've had enough. I'm actually going to divest from my bank. And this website here, which I can put in the chat later, gives you tools on how to do that and how to take steps at different points in time. I'd say that if you decide to leave a bank over their investments in fossil fuels, it's good to make it as loud as possible, right? Because the bank doesn't actually know that you've left unless you make a bit of a point of it. So writing to the bank, if you have social media, putting it on social media, just making as, taking photos of yourself, cutting up the card, all of that I think can really contribute to letting the bank know that you don't want it funding fossil fuels. And the more people that do that, the more the bank feels pressure to actually come out with decent policies on fossil fuel lending. Does anyone have any questions at this point on banks? Yeah, please.
I've got one to ask Rachel.
Yeah, please.
This is on behalf of Paul Willie. He's asked if a super fund or bank or any other company, I guess, are investing in things you don't want. Is it best to divest, or is it best to stay with the fund and try and shape what they do within?
It is such a good question, and I'm so glad you asked that question. Look, I think both can be really useful, but yeah, I guess it depends how much time you have and what you want to do. But I've seen cases, like I've worked with UniSuper members who were putting pressure on UniSuper to divest from fossil fuels. And it's a bit of a case study that I'll show later on in the presentation. But because these super fund members continuously put pressure on UniSuper ended up moving away billions of dollars from fossil fuels. So it was really, really useful thing to do. So it sometimes can be quite useful staying in a company and pushing it in the right direction. I mean, that being said, it's kind of up to you. You might do that for a while and then say, okay, well, actually, ANZ or NAB or whoever it is that you're invested in isn't doing what I want. I'm going to let them know and I'm going to divest. But that kind of letting them know you're going to do it, writing in complaints, and then doing it can be quite useful, that kind of multi-stage process, if that makes sense.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
With the big four, I've noticed that on your little graph, it looked like that NAB had the best proportion, so they had the most renewables and the least fossil fuels out of their investments. However, that was only up to the end of 2019. And lately, I've been seeing quite a bit about them being the worst of the big four. Is there something that's happened recently with them that pushes them into that undesirable first place of worst bank?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And sorry, I probably should have updated the slide to cool. more recent data. So I think my understanding is that NAB's recent oil and gas policy isn't quite as good as some of the other banks' policies, which might be why people are saying it's the worst bank. I think in terms of lending, my understanding is it has traditionally in the past lent less. It's still bad, they still lend millions and millions of dollars. The other thing I think a lot of people are piling on, a lot of groups are piling on NAB at the moment because there's an opportunity to really shape their policy at the moment, which is why they're kind of copying the heat.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. And Sarah's just put a question in the chat about should you join the worst companies and then complain? Again, I guess it's a personal thing. It's tricky, right? Because some companies care more than others, right? Like I would say that Westpac and NAB have traditionally kind of had very green looking, they're more green looking companies. They care a bit more about being green, even though they're not necessarily, I'm not saying they are, but that's the branding that they come across at. So sometimes when a company is being a bit hypocritical, you can have a bit more traction. But it is a bit of a a personal choice on, you know, where you invest and the way you want to do things. I hope, sorry, that's a little bit vague. I also can't give financial advice, but yeah, I think there are different uses of you know, investing in different things and pushing them. Does that answer your question, Sarah? Great. Okay, wonderful. Okay, great. So
there's another question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Rachel,
please.
there's another question from Paul about banks. He was asking what the quickest and easiest way is for people to find out what their bank is investing in. I know that sometimes superannuation companies put up, say, the top 10 or, you know, 50 or whatever businesses that they've got shares in. But what about banks?
Great question. I love questions that I can like lead into. Here's some work we put together. I've just put in the chat our bank comparison table, which you can go to and you can see how much your bank has lent to fossil fuels since 2016, and also see banks that have no record of funding fossil fuels since 2016. And then if your bank has lent to fossil fuels, you can send them an email and say, you know, I'm not happy with this. And if they haven't lent to fossil fuels, you can say, hey, I'm really happy that you're not lending to fossil fuels. Thanks for that. You can see there, so this has pretty up-to-date data. I'll pull it on the screen here so everyone can see. So this is what it looks like. And then you can say, okay, which ones have no fossil fuels? Okay, so you can see ANZ has loaned this much to fossil fuels since 2016, and then compare that to NAB. So ANZ has loaned more since 2016, but with the new policies, I don't know if that puts, I mean, ANZ doesn't seem like it's ahead of NAB, but anyway, NAB has put out some pretty bad policies recently, so that's probably where that comes from. Great. Any other questions?
Have we got time for one more quick one?
Yeah. This is for you guys. Like, I'm happy to answer as many questions as you like.
So I heard of some people who were, like you said before, with the mortgage thing, sometimes it is really hard and you don't get much of a choice because of your circumstances. But you can also, if you are going to take a loan with a bank that you're not happy about, you can make a plan to shift to another bank as soon as you have fulfilled the kind of the first year or 2 years that's required under your contract. You don't have to stay with that bank forever.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. And I guess everyone's financial circumstances is different, and you'd need to find out from your, the person that you're doing that with. That being said, I must say that banks absolutely hate it when you change your mortgage, like when you've got a mortgage with them and you change to another bank to have a mortgage with them, like that's quite a lot of lost revenue for them. So if you are doing that, I think I'd make a real big fuss about the fact that, you know, you saw that they're investing in fossil fuels and you're really not happy about that. And, you know, you could probably like drag that out for a few years as well, right? If you were locked into that contract for a few years, you could probably be writing back and forth with them for a while. And then, you know, after those few years, you're like, right, you really haven't done what I wanted you to do, so I'm moving. And I think that's, it's quite a big deal for banks when more like people with mortgages move. Yeah.
Stephen's just put in the chat too, really. He said, simple really, mutuals don't fund fossil fuels. Is that sort of a rule of thumb? That mutual sort of, I guess they're your cooperatives and your unions and things like that. What are they? The, you know, People's Choice and things like that that were once, you know, the more of those cooperative ventures. Is that a rule of thumb that you can use?
I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that question,
that's
but
cool.
I guess from that list, there are quite a few mutual funds on that list who haven't funded fossil fuels, but I don't think you could make that exclusive.
Okay.
Draw that exclusive line. Yeah.
Thanks.
Pleasure. Okay, great. Well, let's get on to insurance. So insurers actually play a key role in what types of projects can, you're seeing the insurance.
Yep.
Yeah, great. So insurers actually play a really key role in what type of project can be built and operated, because without insurance, no new fossil projects can be built. So like, yeah, I think it's something we sometimes overlook, but it is a really key piece of the puzzle, and something that is quite important. So a few years ago now, I think it was in, between 2017 and 2020, or yeah, 2020, customers, shareholders, and community members were putting pressure on QBE to stop insuring fossil fuels, so coal, oil and gas. So QBE was providing the insurance for thermal coal projects, oil and gas projects, and customers and shareholders were kind of calling out QBE's hypocrisy, because at the same time as they were providing this insurance for these companies, they were copying, the climate catastrophes that was leading to payouts and everything, like bushfires and floods and those kind of things. So thanks to a great campaign with members and shareholders, QBE actually ruled out funding thermal coal mines. They still underwrite, they still provide the insurance for oil and gas, but they don't provide the insurance for thermal coal companies anymore. So what we're asking insurers to do is rule out insuring new oil and gas extraction. And then also insurers also kind of have a pool of money that they invest in stocks. And so we're also asking them to divest from fossil fuel assets. So divest from those fossil fuel stocks. So if you are a customer of an insurance company, I mean, Suncorp has gone a step further than QBE because of customer pressure and shareholder pressure on Suncorp. Suncorp has ruled out insuring underwriting of thermal coal and oil and gas by 2030. But QBE is still underwriting oil and gas. So if you are a customer of QBE or a shareholder, it's actually really great. You can play a role in kind of putting pressure on QBE to stop that insurance of oil and gas companies. Does anyone have any questions about insurance?
There's one here, Rachel from Samantha. She was wondering if there are any tips on finding out the identity of insurance companies that are funding some of these new gas projects. I guess you've spoken about one or two there. Is there a page you can go to, or is there anywhere where this information is easily accessed? It's
a really good question and actually quite a tricky one to answer. So from, you can compare policies with insurance companies to say, okay, well, it won't be Suncorp because Suncorp has a policy, but my understanding is insurance, it's a little bit more difficult to find that information, and you can only find the specific information on what projects they're insuring if there's a disaster that happens, and then it has to come out who the insurance company is that's making that claim. So for example, quite a while ago, we were able to see that QBE was involved in oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico because there was an oil and gas leak. And it came out that, QBE was insuring that. But unfortunately, there's not a comprehensive list of like, oh, and this insurance company is insuring this oil and gas project, as far as I'm aware. But if anyone does find out that information, please let me know. Yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a question then? Because I haven't looked into insurance companies too much, but is there much that is available that can be discerned through their annual reports? If you just did a list of, big international or domestic insurance companies, would that be a way to go?
As in, like, would their annual reports say which companies they were insuring?
Or maybe they might. I haven't looked at insurance companies yet. Yeah, I don't know if annual reports or something like that would be an avenue to find out or to glean information.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely glean information in terms of understanding like which insurance companies would be up for providing insurance, but they generally are very cagey on which specific companies they're insuring. I mean, I know the Stop Adani network has done an amazing job of like stopping a lot of insurance companies from insuring Adani. But my understanding is it's quite hard to know exactly which insurance company is insuring which project.
Maybe they rely on some inside information or some information leaks, Rachel.
Yeah, that would be great.
Could you just ask your own company? I mean, I've got insurance with Allianz of my home and my car.
Yeah.
I don't know whether what they insure or don't. I wonder if I just asked them what they would say.
Look, I think that's a really great idea, and it's a good idea to get a sense of what their policies are around insuring fossil fuels as well. You could say, like, I'm concerned about this issue. I care about climate change. What are your policies on this? And again, I think the more insurance companies that get feedback from customers about the fact that they care about this, the less likely they are, they're kind of weighing up their risks as well. And the more pressure they get, the less likely they are to continue insuring these projects. Yeah, great questions. Thanks so much. Great. Any other questions?
I've got one, but it's more of a kind of campaign idea that I might just say on the record here and somebody might pick it up, or maybe I'll do it one day. I'm just thinking about when you register your car in South Australia and you get to choose between 4 providers of compulsory third party, it's really hard to know which one of those is the most ethical. And I think if somebody was to actually say and put on the record, this is the best choice, it would be so useful, because pretty much all of us have to register our cars every year, and we have to make that choice, and we're kind of flying blind. So, yeah.
That is a great idea, Gabby.
Yeah, it is a good idea. Oh, see, I think that the tricky thing is that a lot of insurance companies are owned, but I think the 3 main insurance companies in Australia, my understanding is QBE, Suncorp, and IAG. And all the others are kind of mini brands of those 3.
Yeah.
So I might just put in, oh, sorry, my computer's doing funny things. I might just see, sorry, I'm just looking up our insurance page. We might not have, you might need to do a little bit of digging. Here we go. Here is our campaign page on insurance, which lists the different types of insurers and whether they invest in oil and gas. Hopefully that is a little bit helpful in discerning like which ones are invested and which ones aren't. But if you do have any questions, feel free to send us an email, or do a little Google search on like maybe the insurance company that you're with is under a different company, and then that company is on the list there.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Okay, awesome. So here now we turn to the shareholder action work at Market Forces. So I'm actually have been working with amazing shareholders for the last nearly 5.5 years now to pressure companies. And we've had quite a bit of success in this area. So yeah, I'm really excited to chat with you about it. I'll give you a little bit, sorry, my screen is in night mode, so it's there we go. I'll give you a little bit of an explanation of what is on this screen. So in the top right corner is Adrian, who is from the Wangan and Jangalingu Family Council, and he's one of the traditional owners that are opposing the Adani Carmichael mine. And thanks to shareholders assigning him as a proxy, he was able to attend the Downer annual general meeting. At Downer were providing Adani with contract service at the time. So that's that. Then we have a school striker in the top, in the bottom right-hand corner, who attended the NAB annual general meeting and called out NAB for their funding of fossil fuels. Then we have in the bottom left corner, there are a group of people that attended the Commonwealth Bank annual general meeting back in 2016 and kind of jumped up with t-shirts that said climate action now. And then in the top right is Marwa, who's also from the Wangan and Jangalingu Family Council. And she actually went to Germany to talk to one of the companies there that were involved in the Adani mine. So annual general meetings. So every company on the Australian Stock Exchange in Australia has to have an annual general meeting, and it's an opportunity for shareholders to they come together with the board and CEO, and there is a section of the annual general meeting where shareholders can ask questions of the company. So I guess it's like a fairly unique setting where you actually get access to the decision makers of the company. Like, it's not every day that you get the active audience of the CEO and the board, and it's quite a good opportunity for shareholders to ask any questions they might have. We've been supporting shareholders to ask questions related to climate and what the company is doing in relation to climate. But you can also, and their investments of fossil fuels, those kind of things. This photo here is taken in the bottom left, is taken at the Origin annual general meeting. And shareholders, so you can, if you're a shareholder of a company, you can either attend the annual general meeting or you can assign someone else to attend on your behalf. So a whole lot of shareholders assigned traditional owners from the Northern Territory to go on their behalf. Origin is planning on fracking the Northern Territory, and there's been an amazing fierce campaign by traditional owners that are saying that Origin don't have their consent to frack, and Origin were kind of fobbing them off, but because shareholders were able to give them these proxy rights, they were actually able to attend the meeting and ask talk about Origin fracking the Northern Territory. Currently this week, actually, there's a bill in Parliament that could change annual general meetings to be permanently online. And I think while it's really good that shareholders would, have access in an online setting, we've seen examples over the last few years of companies really using that to try and dodge difficult questions and everything. So I'm hoping that there is a bit of a hybrid, hybrid result where the annual general meetings can happen in person and also happen on live. So I might talk through another mechanism that shareholders have, which can be really quite successful. And I'll just stop my screen so I can talk to you face to face, is shareholder resolutions. So in Australia, if 100 shareholders sign on to a shareholder resolution, the entire company has to vote on that resolution. So we work with shareholders to get 100 people signed up to climate resolutions, and it means that the entire company has to vote on that climate resolution. And it means that we get to have conversations with the biggest investors in the world about why climate change is important and why, investing in fossil fuels that are not compatible with the Paris Agreement could lead to stranded assets, for example, could lead to, people's money being wasted. So that's another kind of mechanism that we, use with shareholders. I've got some videos here. How are we going for time? Is it, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we've got heaps of time.
Great, okay. Okay, so I've got two. All right, so I'm going to show a little 1 minute video now, which was actually an opportunity basically where because of the shareholder action that happened on a particular, at a particular annual general meeting, it got in the news, which was, we were able to highlight the issue. So David Murray used to be the chair of AMP, and he was known as being a pretty avid climate denier, which is quite problematic in and of itself. But when you're, the chair of a major company that is operating a lot of money, and you're kind of choosing investments, to have those belief systems is very problematic. So we worked with shareholders to attend the annual general meeting, and we also worked with a comedian to kind of highlight the event. And because of this, it kind of got on the news. So I'll just share this with you because if nothing else, it's quite funny. But it does show how also humour can really elevate issues sometimes.
However, those directors did feel the heat from climate change protesters. Andrew Robertson was there.
But it was climate change which surprisingly reared its head, and in particular, David Murray's view of global warming.
Do you still believe that there's no correlation between global warming and the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere?
My opinions about climate change are irrelevant.
Excellent. And in case Mr Murray and his fellow directors didn't get the message, Coral Bleach, aka climate activist Deborah Hart, made a very untypical AGM intervention.
So David, I'm just so excited to see you here and to hear your views, to hear that you're not going to abandon us billionaire coal diggers.
What do you think you achieved in that meeting today?
Well, I think we got people to realise that David Murray is actually a climate denier.
We're damn well very concerned about what's happening to the planet.
Wow.
When my electorate was burning.
Oh, sorry, Rachel, you're on.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah, Deb's quite funny. She does a lot of parody stuff. So she pretends to be a billionaire coal miner and kind of congratulates people for continuing to burn fossil fuels and everything. But I think it's quite, she uses humor to really get things in the spotlight.
Excellent question that guy asked.
Sorry, yeah, that was really quite powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to superannuation funds because I know some of you might not own direct shares, but if you have a superannuation fund, you are an indirect shareholder. So superannuation funds in Australia own $3 trillion. And they own like roughly 40% of the stocks on the Australian Securities Exchange, as well as a whole lot of international stocks and everything as well. So you might not know it, but by having a superannuation fund, you could be invested in oil and gas companies like Woodside and Santos, thermal coal companies like Whitehaven, and companies that are trying to frack like Origin. So we have on our website here, and I can put it in the chat as well. Our website shows, which super funds are invested in fossil fuels and what percentage of your super fund is invested in fossil fuels as well. And there's also the ability to write to your super fund and say, I don't feel comfortable that you're invested in fossil fuels. We've also, and sorry, this is now 23 Australian companies, but we've done a study called Out of Line, Out of Time, which shows that there are 23 companies on the Australian Stock Exchange that are not operating within 1.5 degrees. And that really forms our work around superannuation funds. So we're calling on superannuation funds to stop investing in these particular companies. So I want to talk a little bit about the UniSuper Divest campaign because it's my favorite campaign ever, but also because I think it's such a good indication of how much success members can have. And while the campaign isn't over, I think that what has been achieved over the last 1.5 years, particularly because it was, in a pandemic and we weren't able to have a lot of offline actions, was actually quite significant. So this is taken pre-pandemic. In January 2022, we launched a campaign calling on UniSuper to stop investing in fossil fuel projects. At the time, UniSuper was invested about $10 billion in fossil fuel projects, projects like Whitehaven, like Woodside, like Santos. And so, I think because it was off the back of the bushfires, climate change was really front and center. We had 10,000 members sign up within 6 weeks, and actions, outside. This is at the Australia Universities Conference, which was a conference sponsored by UniSuper. So because of the campaigning that UniSuper members did over the course of last year, so it started off in an offline setting and then moved on to online during the pandemic, UniSuper actually ditched their coal assets, so their assets in thermal coal companies in Australia. And then because of the continued push, UniSuper ditched active holdings in pure play oil and gas companies, which is really great. I think last year was quite an interesting year because at the start of the year, well, actually, no, this is a few years ago, but, this investment magazine talked about how, super funds would never divest, right? That it wasn't gonna happen. Yet actually, last year, we saw UniSuper divest from thermal coal, as well as Hester and Aware Super. And then UniSuper went a step further this year and ditched active holdings in oil and gas. So it was billions of dollars that they actually divested. It's not, UniSuper isn't by any means perfect. There's still a way to go, but I think it's a huge shift over a relatively short amount of time. So we've got quite a lot of campaigns on super funds at the moment. There's a campaign on Host Plus, getting them to divest from coal, oil and gas. We've also got active campaigns on Aware Super and Hester. Those two companies, they like to pretend that they're super green. They're health funds, but unfortunately they are continuing to fund oil and gas projects like Santos and Woodside. So we did an action earlier this year with Host Plus members. We showed up at a Swans game and handed out some clap banners to people saying, that said, Host Plus, your super fund play is to quit coal. So that was a bit of fun before the lockdown happened again. Great, so that is the end of my presentation. Does anyone, I'll just open it up now for questions.
Hey, thank you.
I've got a question, Rachel.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, can you take us just through the earlier stages of that Uni Super campaign, because I'm wondering, how do you get the people together? Say, is there a group or one person that has their funds in Uni Super that comes to you and says, I'm not happy, can you help me? Is that how it goes? And then you put the word out, or do they need to come with a plan or with a group of them? How does that all get started?
It's a really good question. And in the case of Uni Super, we actually did have a few academics come. So Uni Super is the super fund of academics. And at that time, now the legislation has changed and they can choose any fund they want to be invested in. But at the time, if you were in a university, you had to be with Uni Super. So people were locked in. So we did actually have a few academics reach out to us and say, we've been engaging with Uni Super. They're not doing anything. They're not taking us seriously. Can you run a campaign on them? And we thought it was a really good opportunity. So that's kind of how that came about. But it can kind of depend. Like sometimes we'll just say, okay, we're going to run a campaign on this company, and then, we'll build the lists from there. So it's kind of, sometimes it's people coming to us and saying, hey, can you do this? And sometimes we're like, okay, we want to do this. How do we kind of build the infrastructure to do that?
So it's a matter of word of mouth and social media, that people who might have be a member of those funds, they get in contact with you if they see that you're making a campaign. Is that kind of how it works?
It's a great question. I mean, for the Uni Super campaign, I guess academics, it was a lot of word of mouth. So people were talking about it at their universities. People were posting about it on Twitter. We had like Uni Super Diverse face masks, so people were wearing those and talking about that. And people were emailing their colleagues as well. I think like that peer-to-peer, oh, hey, did you know that actually our super fund is invested in fossil fuels? Do you want to sign on to this? I've signed on to this campaign. Do you want to sign on as well? Yeah, Samantha?
So I've got so it's kind of similar to the Uni Super one again, and maybe this is similar to the question I asked before, and I probably do know the answer to it, but I don't know. So market forces, have they done much work or had any progress on, so federal government, territory government, they're the big ones in terms of superannuation? Yeah.
Do you mean the specific superannuation fund, like the Commonwealth Super Corporation?
Or Oz Super, etc., etc. Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So Australian Super, we have been talking to Australian Super. I guess we do try and push all the super funds. Australian Super is a really interesting one. Like they have a very high holding of Origin Energy. They have about a 10% stake in Origin Energy, but they don't have any active holdings in pure play thermal coal companies or pure play oil and gas companies. So they're by no means perfect at all. And I think that there's a really good opportunity to push Australian Super on their 10% holdings of Origin Energy, but we're not campaigning on them because we're not campaigning on them in the same way we did for Uni Super, for example, because they've already divested, they've already gone quite a bit further than a lot of super funds have.
That's okay. I might just think about that as food for thought, because they still are the main superannuation provider in the Northern Territory. In fact, the superannuation provider was just changed without any input. So I think you had to go some sort of distance to actually choose who you wanted to roll over your superannuation with, or it just got rolled over. And obviously Northern Territory government is, with participation from federal government, quite heavily invested in fracking in the NT. So yeah, I understand that particular track record, but yeah, there's still an interest one. And then obviously Commonwealth, federal government as well too is a big one.
Yeah, totally. And we're kind of figuring out plans for next year, but I think Commonwealth Super Corp is definitely on our radar. And so if you know any Commonwealth Super Corp members that want to get things started, please please pass them our way. Yeah, again, I think there is a really good opportunity there to try and get Australian super out of origin. So, you know, if that's something you're interested in working on, I'm happy to be in touch about that.
Actually, I was at the Commonwealth Super members meeting last week. So.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
So yeah, so they was. I think their view is that they're staying in order to influence companies, not to divest, and you know, with the risk of it being just filled in with replaced by other shareholders who don't try to influence the behaviour of those companies. So that's their view on it, on how that's their strategy about managing the change to you know, for climate change.
Yeah, that is the line that we're given a lot for superannuation funds, and that was the line that UniSuper gave us as well. That being said, you know, I guess the beauty of these shareholder resolutions that we lodge is that you get to see how superannuation funds voted. And often the funds that are saying, oh, but we engage, they actually vote against these shareholder resolutions. So I think it's often, unfortunately, just a way of super funds kind of batting away any asks of divestment. And actually super funds like UniSuper that kind of batted away and said, oh, we engage for quite a long time, when there was a lot of pressure on them, they ended up divesting.
Yeah, though I think they seem to have a pretty reasonable strategy about it, but and it certainly was. I think it was certainly the number one question from members, and the chair, after sort of introducing, the chair opened the meeting, and after sort of, you know, introducing himself, the first thing he tackled was climate change, because obviously that's the number one burning issue with members. So you're very aware. I think every second question during the evening would have been about climate change. So yeah, it's definitely on their radar.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. And yeah, thanks so much, Tom, for kind of attending. Paul, I've just got some questions from Stephen in the chat, so I might just do those, and then I saw you put yourself off mute, so we'll go to you next. Stephen says, you know, when we think about UniSuper investing heavily in the big four banks which finance fossil fuels, yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so yeah, and then asking if you're in the UniSuper Environmental Fund, does that work? So UniSuper is still invested in some companies like APA, which is building a gas pipeline for the Narrabri gas project from which Santos is. It's a pretty big oil and gas project, basically. So again, UniSuper is not perfect, and I'm not kind of holding them up as the best of the best, but just showing that member pressure can really work in shifting a fund. And my understanding is that the environmental option with UniSuper does exclude fossil fuels. I'm not sure if they exclude the banks that fund the fossil fuels, right? So you can kind of see that all this stuff is starting to get a bit intertwined and linked, because your super fund probably has shares in the big four banks, and the big four banks are invested in fossil fuels. So I guess that's another imperative to try and get the big four banks out of fossil fuels, you know, out of this expansion of fossil fuels, so that your super fund isn't indirectly funding that. I hope that makes sense. Great. So Paul, please go ahead. You're just on mute.
Sorry, it took me a while to unmute. Yeah, I was going to make that point about secondary investment, but you've just covered it. Just another thing to note is that the South Australian government super fund is Super SA. They had a socially responsible investment option, but curiously enough, it was the only one of their investment options that was outsourced to be managed by AMP. But they've just insourced it recently in the last 2 months. So I wonder if you knew anything about that, Rachel, or could make any comment on that.
I don't know anything on that particular example, Paul, but that is interesting, and yeah, interesting that they're getting that in-house knowledge as well now.
Well, I'm with Super SA because I'm a former, retired South Australian public servant, and I've always just avoided the socially responsible investment option, to be honest, because I didn't trust that it would be managed appropriately by AMP.
Right.
Unsurprisingly. But, the Super SA, they do have some investment, but it's secondary. They don't directly invest in any fossil fuels, but, they're major, they own shares in all kinds of companies. So they, like the point you're making, they have shares in at least 3 of the 4 major banks, I think. So through that sort of secondary means, they're still supporting the fossil fuel sector.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way to think about it as well, is that, if your super fund is invested in the banks that are invested in fossil fuels, you can lobby the banks, right? You can say, I'm invested in you, because you are.
Yeah.
And that kind of gives you a way of engaging with the banks as well.
Just a point to add, Paul and Rachel, I spoke to an ethical investor, must have been a month or 2 ago now, because I'm also in Super SA, and was talking about that particular ethical product. And for what it's worth, for anyone else that's thinking about that too, he said now that the management's moved away from, now that AMP don't manage it anymore, he's much happier with the product and would advise people on using that. And he's part of that. I think there's a group of about 30, is there, Rachel? I'm not quite sure. There's a group of ethical finance advisors in Australia. So he's one of those. So that was sort of good enough for me. So yeah, so it's better than it was.
Thanks for sharing that, Mandy. And Paul, does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, that helps. Thanks, Mandy. I might shift my super into that option then, I think. I'll talk to you further about it outside of this, though, too. Thank you.
And there was a question from Rob in the chat. He says, I'm new to Market Forces and I wonder if Market Forces recommends particular companies that are doing things to address climate change or promoting helpful renewable technologies.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, and welcome. And welcome everyone. Yeah, good question. Look, we don't promote companies as much as giving data on, like, these are the banks that are funding fossil fuels and this is how much they're funding fossil fuels. These are the banks that are not funding fossil fuels. Same goes for superannuation funds. So we don't actually say, oh, but these are really amazing companies that are invested in renewables or this other thing. There are like ethical advisors that can give you advice on that, but it's not really under our remit per se.
I think those comparison tables are really, really useful. That's just my personal view. I mean, I just looked up the super fund that I'm with, which is Future Super, and was relieved to see that they had green ticks on both of those two things. And also the bank for our Sustainable Prosperity Action Group. If anyone's wondering, we bank with Bank Australia and they are pretty ethical. And so the credit unions seem to be pretty good as well. Yeah. So not that I can give advice, but I tell you what, I do check out those tables a lot. So I urge everybody else to as well. It doesn't take much. It takes like 2 or 3 minutes before you make your choice.
Rachel, oh, sorry. I was just going to ask another quick question about, you were talking about direct shareholders and then members of super funds. If you're a member of a super fund and indirectly hold shares through your fund's investment, do you have the same rights as a run-of-the-mill shareholder?
Sorry, you just froze for a sec there. Sadly, no. So while I think it's still useful as a framework to understand that by being a super fund member, sorry, it's saying my connection is unstable. Can everyone hear me okay, or am I fading out? Great. I think it's good conceptually to understand that, you know, when you give your money to a super fund, they invest some of that money in shares, and some of that money might be in shares you're not comfortable with. And so it's good to like lobby the super fund. But unfortunately, you don't have the same shareholder rights. So you can't vote at annual general meetings. You can't get people to attend annual general meetings or attend them yourself. That being said, if sometimes we'll lodge shareholder resolutions, if you have shares, you know, if you're with a superannuation fund, you can write to that super fund and say, I want you to vote in favour of this resolution. But you can't actually dictate the way the super fund votes other than lobbying them to vote in favour. Does that make sense?
It does, thanks.
Yeah. And to buy shares on the Australian Stock Exchange online, it is a little bit of a barrier. A minimum parcel in Australia is $500 plus money to buy and money to sell those shares. Yeah.
I've got some leftover funds when AMP went public or private, I'm not quite sure, years and years ago. And they wanted to buy them off me recently, and I kind of just held on to them. It was only a couple $100 worth. It's not quite 500, because I thought they might come in useful one day. Is that okay if you only got that amount?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Look, I could still go and be a
absolutely
at the AGM.
Yeah, if you had $1 worth of shares, it's just a barrier to buy the shares. But if the shares go down in price, or even if you buy, you know, $500 and then sell $450 and have $50, like you still have, you can still attend annual general meetings and you can still sign on to shareholder resolutions. There's no kind of minimum requirement. Like the minimum requirement to do that is 1 share, which is quite small. Yeah.
That's great. So wondering what you would suggest if people want to you know, help out with different campaigns that Market Forces is running. What are some actions that we can jump in and take?
Yeah, really great question. So I guess it does depend on, because we generally work with people that are like, you know, at the moment we're working with NAB customers, and we're working with you know, Aware super fund members and Hester super fund members. So it's often like quite specific to a certain fund. But if you are, we've got bank annual general meetings coming up. So if you have shares in ANZ, NAB or Westpac and you want to kind of attend and ask a question, let me know. If you have a super fund that is invested in fossil fuels and you want to attend a member meeting like Tom did the other day, thanks so much for doing that, Tom, and you want some help writing a question, let us know. And if you are, yeah, I definitely recommend going and checking out those banks comparison tables and the super fund tables and contacting your bank or super fund and letting them know that, you know, you're not happy with investments if you're not happy with them.
Could you tell us with the super funds, if you are able to switch, and understanding that sometimes, you know, if you're a teacher or if you work for the government or a health worker, or there's heaps of different loopholes where they kind of lock you into a super fund that you might not be happy with. But let's say you are able to switch. I understand it's a lot easier now than it used to be. So could you tell folks what it entails and reassure people that it's not going to like take up too much of their time and it will be easier?
Yeah, I did it the other day actually. And I mean, I don't know if any of you had this situation when I was like a 18-year-old and I had 7 different jobs. And so I had 6 different super funds and I had, then I had to merge them all. And I remember it being such a difficult process and having to have like the printed fill out forms, and it just took me an age. Whereas now I literally just like went online, looked up the super fund that I wanted, opened an account, then typed in my other super fund that I had. And because I think like super funds want you, right? Like you're a valuable member. They want members. So they're going to try to make it as easy as possible for you. So once you've opened up that account, you then type in your other account, they'll automatically transfer all your money over to that super fund. And then you can close your old account. I guess just the thing that probably takes a little bit more time is like letting your employer know that you've changed super funds, right? Because that can be a little bit of a, you need to make sure you've done that. Otherwise, you'll be with 2 separate funds and you'll probably be getting 2 separate fees, and that's kind of not ideal.
Yeah. When I joined Future Super, they sent me an email template and they said, forward this to your employers. It's got all the numbers that they need to know, like the USI and the SPIN codes and whatever else, numbers that your payroll person needs to know. And it was all in the one email, and it was super easy. I don't know if other ethical ones do that as well, but yeah, it was so much easier than I thought it was going to be. Absolutely no regrets.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a great question. And I guess, from another point of view, I'm not trying to give financial advice, but superannuation is so important, it kind of goes up kind of astronomically over the course of your life. And so it does pay to pay a bit of attention to which super fund you're invested in. 1, for the planet, but also 2, for your own financial stability later on.
Actually, that sort of leads me to another question. I'm sorry, I'm hogging the airtime here, but do you get the sense as a campaigner that money is starting to kind of talk in terms of climate? Like, what I mean by that is, are we starting to see people who sort of do have their finger on the pulse thinking that coal has no future, and even if you're not doing it for the right reasons, if you're doing it for financial reasons, are funds starting to make the right decisions, even if their reasoning is not sort of an altruistic one?
It's a great question, actually. And when you look at the, superannuation funds in Australia, about half of them have divested from thermal coal companies like Whitehaven Coal and New Hope Coal, right? And these are funds that, have for the longest time said, we engage, how you can engage with a pure play coal company, I don't really know. But I think the trend we're seeing is that companies are getting out. We did, again, this is not financial advice, but last year we commissioned some research which looked at 3 oil and gas companies, Woodside, Santos and Oil Search. And it showed that over the course of a 10-year period, those companies had actually lost shareholders' money. And I think you are getting, savvy investors like UniSuper, that I know we had the whole campaign on them, but John Pearce, the CIO, is seen as a fairly savvy investor in the field, and he's kind of saying that like the writing is on the wall for these companies. So you definitely are seeing that with some of these major institutional investors, and the trend is going that way. But obviously it's not fast enough. And I think like a key component of UniSuper getting out was UniSuper members putting pressure on, right? Like that probably wouldn't have happened as quickly if they hadn't have done that, which is why there's such a call for action for everyone to kind of take action and call on their banks and super funds to stop investing in fossil fuel projects. I know as well, just to give a shout out, I know that 350 is doing a lot of work on NAB at the moment. And they've got a lot of like offline actions and other things that people can do, like whether they're invested in NAB or not. So I definitely recommend people checking them out and doing some actions with 350 if they can.
Thank you. I've noticed there's a few stickers on NAB ATMs now saying, get out of fossil fuels and, that sort of thing. I think it's great. As soon as they tear them off, we just put them back on. And Tanya put something in the chat, which I thought was really useful too. Tanya says, you can consolidate super funds really quickly directly on MyGov. Just click through to the ATO and you can roll over. So that's great advice too. If people have more than one super fund, don't pay that many fees, honestly. Pick a good one and do we have any other questions from folks who are on the call? Just unmute yourself or put your hand up or type.
The last one, Rachel, I'm wondering, are there any institutions that are holding companies to account like shareholders do, like company against another company that, have a relationship? Is there much of that happening? I know it's probably a little bit out of your field because you deal with individuals more, but.
It is a good question. And what we've been hearing from UniSuper is that they are doing that a little bit. I mean, I think it's all well and good for major investors to say they're engaging with companies, but I think as super fund members and shareholders, it's good to keep them to account and say, okay, so what specifically are you doing and how are you keeping them to account? But my understanding is that does happen sometimes.
Thanks.
I think Tom and Samantha,
Oh, Tom, is Tom going first?
Yep. Hi. Thanks, Rachel. Do you have anything to do in relationship with the Australian Centre for Corporate Responsibility, ACCR, and
yes.
Also they've introduced a new program from overseas, Say on Climate, that one for shareholders resolutions.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question I get a lot, particularly because I work in, shareholder action work and so does ACCR. So yeah, we're kind of good mates in the movement. So Emma, who does my equivalent job at ACCR, actually, we work together a lot to try and help each other get shareholders. So she might say, oh, hey, I need 20 more shareholders in AGL, and so then I'll go out to our shareholder list and say, our friends at ACCR are doing this thing, do you want to sign on? So I think there is that kind of positive relationship, and we are trying to back each other up in the movement. I guess we have slightly different strategies, but so does a lot of different organizations, and I think that really brings strength to the movement. So yeah, there's that really good relationship there, and trying to help each other out when we can.
Great, thanks.
Samantha?
Actually, I was pretty much going to make the same point. So all good.
Oh, cool.
Excellent. Have we covered everything that's in the chat? I'm just going to check back. Yeah, we covered like secondary investments from yeah, I think that's all of the questions from the chat, but oh, somebody else has got their hand up. No, that's Samantha.
Oh, actually, I was going to ask it.
No worries. Okay.
Again, and I'll just make it a short one. I can't remember if it's 350 or is it market forces as well, that while we're talking about Australian banks, Australian superannuation, insurance, etc., I can't remember if it's market forces and or 350 are also working with the international companies as well. Just my question for that is, for example, some of the fracking companies, like the junior companies that are not Origin or Santos, where they've gone onto the stock exchange this year, and so they've had to raise capital, and they've got those international investments, whether it's HSBC or banks in New York, etc. We've got those international partnerships. I'm just thinking of COPE26 and, you know, that international market money sort of pool there where Australia has actively tried to, you know, encourage money coming in. If we've got those international links as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, Market Forces isn't just a domestic organisation now. So we have an international team that work in Japan, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and the UK. And so our campaigners in the UK are campaigning on UK banks like Barclays and Standard Chartered and HSBC. And, you know, there's quite a few Japanese banks that are heavily invested in coal companies and stuff here as well. So we are doing that work and trying to work with folks on the ground in countries that are being impacted by these companies.
Yeah, okay. I was just thinking like the fracking companies, a lot of their money, so that's mostly the US, some of the institutional backers that are coming through. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a good question. I mean, when we do have some relationships with US, we don't have any campaigners in the US at the moment, but we do have relationships with those major institutional investors in the US, like your BlackRocks, for example. Whether they want to listen to us is another thing. And I know there's a campaign specifically on BlackRock in the US, but yeah, that is definitely something we do in our work.
If there's no other people with a burning question, I was wondering if we could just spend a couple of minutes on what's happening with the Adani coal mine just before we wrap up. I get a lot of emails from Market Forces on this and also from the Stop Adani movement as well. But others might just appreciate a bit of an update.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like the Stop Adani movement is one of those that there's so much happening all the time that even though I'm working in an organisation that's working on it, I'm not always across everything that's going on. But my understanding is that, you know, there's a lot of work at the moment that's been on insurance companies and getting insurance companies not to insure the Adani mine. And I hope that some of the background on insurance companies and their importance kind of showcases how important it is to kick those insurers out. I think there's been like quite a record number of companies that the movement has been able to kick out. So like props to all of you and everyone that's worked on that. And at the moment, Gabrielle, you might be more up to date. There's one company I can't think of off the top of my head that they're putting a lot of pressure on.
Yeah,
an insurance company in the UK. I can look it up.
I just did an action on it the other day. I'll just see if I've still got the email. BlackRock is one of them. I'm just having a look here. Oh, okay. So 5 key investors are still funding Adani. It says in this email from the Stop Adani movement. BlackRock, HSBC, MUFG, I'm not sure who they are, JP Morgan, and the State Bank of India. So there's a lot of, there's been some requests, you know, will you send an email to the CEO, which has been a really easy action. And it comes from your own email rather than going through Market Forces server, which is good because then it's more likely to get past their spam blockers. They even had some really cool, innovative actions like sending them a calendar invite. So their calendars just got clogged up with all these invites to discuss what they're going to do about the planet's future, which I thought was a really clever.
And I've heard like internal intel is that that actually kind of is quite impactful because CEOs and people in high management, their whole calendars kind of are then they're constantly seeing the message, but also they're really having to grapple with and like delete these things constantly, and that it can really throw a spanner in the works for them. So definitely a tactic to use.
Yeah, I do love that as a tactic. I also love the kind of like play on old technology, like send them a fax. If they still have a fax number, and they get all these faxes coming out. Yeah, very, very clever climate campaigners. Oh, Stephen's posted here, BlackRock will be cutting ties with previous investments involving thermal coal and other investments that have a large environmental risk. Oh, that's good news. Calendar jamming, yeah, that's it. Fantastic. I think as well, like with the actual progress of the Adani mine, they have started digging up coal. It's obviously 10 years later and only a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of what they had hoped to be doing by this time. And it's not too late to kind of, stop it in its tracks. And there's been some really cool direct action on stopping the coal trains and stopping the port of Newcastle from operating, which I've been following on Twitter, which really brave people have been like getting up there and putting their bodies in the way of this machinery, and it's really inspiring and quite terrifying sometimes. So yeah, again, we kind of have to approach the problem from all sides, and yeah, props to everybody who's involved. And yeah, sometimes it only takes a minute to send an email. It only takes a couple of seconds to share a video or like someone's post or send them an encouraging comment, and it all really does help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, like, I can understand if people feel discouraged at times, but I would just like highlight what Gabrielle's saying. And, I think it's because of everyone's input that it's stopped this mine for the last 10 years. And while it's quite sad that they are digging up coal, it doesn't mean that we can't, continue to stop them. And, I think all the pressure is really working, and I definitely encourage people to keep the pressure on.
Thanks. And thanks also for your comment there, Carol, about the company doesn't actually care much about the people and the employees, and people do have to learn the hard way that they actually don't care about them. So we're right on 8:30. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Rachel. It's been really, really interesting, and I'm glad we got it organised before the end of the year. It's really good. We will definitely keep in touch, and you might be interested to know that a bunch of us are coming over to Melbourne. You're in Melbourne, right? Yeah. To do an event in February called Rethinking Capitalism. It's a weekend intensive on progressive economics, and Stephen and I will be coming over, and a handful of other people from Adelaide as well to run it. And 5th and 6th of February, if people are interested in Melbourne, maybe we can send you an invite and you can pass it on. So yes, thanks very much for talking to us. Love your work. And everybody, please sign up to Market Forces, get their emails. You can help with their actions, follow them on social media, and amplify the work that they're doing. It's really, really great.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks so much everyone for the work you're doing, because we wouldn't exist if it weren't for people actually taking action. So yeah, really, really appreciate everything that everyone's doing.
Great. All right. Well, I might turn the recording off at that point. Let's give Rachel a round of applause. Woo, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'll just leave you with, I don't know if you've seen, but we partnered with the Chaser. I don't know if you know the Chasers, to kind of rebrand NAB. And there's some pretty funny content on there that's really winding NAB up. So if you have socials and you want to repost any of that content, that would be great.
Yeah, nice one. All right, I'll switch the recording off. Thank you.
Thank you.